It's like people are literally being indoctrinated into this like hellscape today, right now.
Yeah.
Around this country and this planet, people are like literally being like, shamanically initiated into this shadow field today. Like right now.
Yeah.
All over the place. Yeah,
Right.
right now.
The container is now open. This is the second half of our mega-sode odyssey with Rob Kancler. He is a spiritual guide and a coach for men who want to become the pioneers of their own sexual futures. If you listen to our first episode with Rob, link in show notes, you know he's also an incredibly deep thinker with this profound view of the human experience. He teaches us what we can do with this magical and powerful energy that courses through us, and how we can break free from the shadow prison that is our current sexual culture. It's super compelling stuff, and it is on its way. But first, I would like to thank our patrons. They went to patreon.com/thecontainer, and they made a commitment to give small monthly donations that keep the great ship, the container, afloat. And it's because of them that you're able to watch this today. And now, the second leg of our marathon with Rob Kancler.
What I really appreciate this this new way to sort of slow down and not have what is considered sexual energy so definite. Like, sexual energy isn't like completely locked in to sex as like, an act between two mammals. I don't know, like it's like it's not it doesn't have to be locked into the terminus of ejaculation into ovaries or whatever.
Penis and vagina,
Right.
Yeah.
So then I'm wondering, or I guess I really want to have some kind of practice of like I'm imagining maybe it's something like ginning that up and then like working with it in a way that doesn't lead to that. It leads somewhere. Like how do I teach myself to find these other avenues to just listen to the energy as energy and then pick the avenue that I pour it into.
Yeah. It's so cool. It reminds me of a conversation thank you for your question. Appreciate it and feel you in that. It reminds me of a conversation I was just having with a dear friend and colleague, brilliant, brilliant woman, brilliant facilitator also. And we were talking about how like learning to discern what is like a trauma bond and what is like actual deep resonance and compatibility it's just such an important thing for a lot of us. And it's easy to miss. It's easy to be like, wow, that person's so compelling and attractive. And when we really like drop in and feel through it, it's like, this is just a photocopy of unhealthy thing that I've done 20 times. Okay, glad I caught it. Like that's also seems like a relevant thing. It's like how do we really discern things that maybe at first impulse or first glance might actually be very different than a deeper truth or a more reliable understanding. Yeah, more useful perspectives. I think that this is so there's a couple things. Like one is it's interesting to explore stuff with other people because we have multiple sources of feedback, like multiple kind of interfaces. Women are definitely known to be oracles in a way, especially when they're not in some kind of distortion. That I found that very feminine beings tend to have an incredible ability to offer insights into how things resonate based on like what happens in their body when certain things are present. So that's an interesting thing to have on the table. Just in general, like impact of like what's it like in a group field or just with one other individual when I say this, like what does that feel like? Does it seem right, or does it feel suspicious or untrustworthy, or is there a contraction, or does it bring more intimacy and safety in the field or whatever? Like these things I think can be very, very helpful of like, oh yeah, like what's this like for you to hear? Because for me it's like it seems kind of right, but I don't really know. Um, yeah, that these kinds of explorations can be helpful. Just like, what's this like for you to hear? And then the other piece has to do with embodiment. Like, I think to understand more about how consciousness works and how we can use our somatic senses to um, be aware of where we're at. Like is this a in a basic way? Like, am I triggered? Am I like above or below the line? Like, am I able to actually be open right now or not? Like, that's just a very basic kind of binary assessment that people can benefit a lot from practicing, of just like being aware. Like, am I centered? Am I triggered? Am I in victim or in outsourcing something? So
Mm.
yeah, and these are not simple things. It's very deep and related to so many layers of adaptation and survival and collective patterning, and it's um it's a profound exploration that I think is inherently deconstructive and related to a kind of awakening to essence and healing, and like necessarily to explore these particular threads of like, how do I know who I really am? How do I know what is my essence, and how do I know what is just something happening in a body that doesn't have any necessary relevance or meaning? It's deep, confusing for sure at times, the distinction. And it can also be so liberating when people own that. When I remember once in a group field a couple months ago, somebody just named that of like, there's so much activation in this space right now, and I just want a presence that like I'm aware that this seems like it doesn't have any meaning really. Like there's very little meaning in all of the activation that's here. It's just happening in these biological systems, and the content is not important. It doesn't matter. It's hard for people to just let it go. Just let it go. It doesn't matter.
Yes. Oh, that's so interesting. That reminds me of a conversation we just had the other night with a group of friends about, yeah, like not identifying with like what the body, this is the body is having an experience, and like, are you
Totally.
fully so completely identified with it that you're unable to see, like you're only able to see through the narrative of what that physical experience is, versus like being able to really look back, like step back and look like this is
Hmm. Hmm.
a body doing what a body does in
Mm.
in
Yes,
this environment.
totally.
And that's so cool, because that is, I mean, to me that's like a pretty major step toward um like
Hmm.
non-duality and like uh enlightenment, is like being able
Yeah.
to really be in that third position
Yes.
of looking at, I mean, in my,
Hmm.
yeah, anyway.
Mm.
Cool. Yeah, I like this. I like this. And I find that it's been really useful. Some light bulbs have gone off when we talk about how a lot of our like thinking activity is actually, it's a fear-based activity, and it's an expression of flee. That there are four distinct expressions of fear in these kinds of biological systems. There's fear, or there's sorry, flight, fight, freeze, and faint. people say that like fawn is a thing, but fawn is adaptations. It's not a physiological thing. Yeah, so these four different categories: flight, fight, freeze, and faint. That most like obsessive thinking is just flee into the head. It's like I'm going somewhere else where I'm safe. I'm going to go somewhere else to find safety. And the going somewhere else is up into my head. That this
Well,
realization can be very helpful for people of like, oh, that's what that is.
mhm.
Go ahead.
Something I noticed as you said that, it clicked into me that those of us who spent years looking at pornography and like architecting a lot of the brain through that like hyper normal stimulus,
Yeah.
uh like fear moving us into the brain, we like, especially if sexuality is involved, then we're like working with a rail system that in many ways was produced by a relationship to pornography to some degree, to
Totally.
more or less. And that there's this way that like uh yeah, that you're flying up into this like house of mirrors produced by a
Mhm.
certain yeah, I don't know, an industry with its own various and sundry influences that maybe wouldn't be the house of mirrors we would choose to operate in if we
Mhm.
were to like sit back and make a
Mhm.
choice. That probably wouldn't be the one we would want to be working in. The
Yeah.
and I think what brings that up for me, I noticed, um, I don't, for almost a year now. I don't look at any porn. I don't even do any like masturbation, and that's sort of like a practice that has helped me. But I noticed in the weeks of like realizing there was work to be done in this sexual field and like having a lot of fear about what that would mean, bringing it up in the relationship and starting to work with it and what might get loose and stuff. I
Mm.
noticed that I had like a desire to look at pornography in a way that I hadn't in a very,
Mm.
very long time. And
Mhm.
yeah, so like I'm appreciating too, this is like a chain of connections that's leading very far away from where we were, but it's sort of like, yeah, all very
Yeah.
alive for me.
Wild.
Cool. Cool. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very relatable and normal. I think, yeah, the um, mystery of like why the kind of pornography or ejaculation addiction thing comes back around is something I've heard a lot of men talk about, and I've experienced that myself too. Of like, it's such a strong, like, oh, I have to do this now. And it's just like, whoa, I haven't felt that way in years. Where'd that come from? Interesting.
Mm.
Um, I think sometimes it has to do with just like dysregulation and resourcing in the system, just trying seeking to resource itself in a known way. Um, but yeah, you said something really cool that I wanted to reframe or like add an additional frame around where it's like we learn to have sex from our heads that and this relates to pornography, and I think it also relates to this deep indoctrination that it's not safe to be in our bodies, that you know that that was just the situation that we were born into and the inheritance that we received even epigenetically and certainly developmentally, that this is a situation where you're meant to like brain taxi your body around for your lifetime instead of being embodied, and how this relates to our sense of our own emotions and the things that we experience internally, and this tendency to be resisting and like oppositional of oneself, which from what I've seen, it just seems like it really tracks back to self-hatred, and like we're trained in self-distrust and self-hatred so intensely that often turns into like all that being projected on other people. So this practice, like what I think, what we were talking about before, what seems to undo this and be related to a lot of the things that we've talked about is the practice of like, how do I face what is coming up without getting carried away? Like, how to, because it's like the idea of like just suppressing stuff or like trying to control or resist our experiences, that doesn't really work. It's like it might give you an opportunity to kind of like overlay more personas and adaptations, but I'm personally not interested in that. Or like as a professional person supporting folks, I'm not interested in that. It's like the other direction is where real transformation and sustainable change come from. And that is, um, yeah, in line with this very popular thing that people say, that the way out is through. That it's like you don't avoid these experiences, you feel them more. You don't try to not feel shame or frustration or anger. You actually feel it more and let it move through. Because the suppression of it is like, this is how we get all fragmented, and it's trauma, basically, a trauma response, and stacked on top of this culture, like this conditioning of not trusting ourselves, that we're just in a very complicated relationship with experience itself. Like we're trying to control who we are and what we feel and what happens, instead of something that is very different than that. And I know that this language can be confusing and requires more nuance to really capture the essence of what I mean here, because it's not that like we want to just be in the chaos of experience. It's not that either, but there are ways to, like in a more structured or conscious approach, learn to face what is happening and allow it and accept it, and come into like a field of love and learning as things move through. And ironically, it seems like that's where the kind of claws or like grip of all of these kinds of um, things that make people suffer stop happening. It's not via the suppression of experience, which is where a lot of people just get kind of trapped in this merry-go-round of suffering, that it's like learning to actually be with. And that is the rewriting of this developmental trauma, essentially, where we were not accompanied, that adults did not have the embodied capacity and skill and ability and practice of being with themselves and being with others. And then when they raised a little one, they trained us in this thing of suppression and avoidance via direct indoctrination, and also just by the incidents or consequences of not being able to accompany a developing nervous system to regulate and integrate. I think we talked about this last time, and I'm sure you all know this, that like little ones cannot process and regulate on their own. They literally do not have the brain or body that does that. Like they don't have the hardware. It is literally impossible for little kids to digest and regulate without adult nervous systems. Like they literally they do not have that apparatus in their nervous system. It is not possible. So given that we are in this code, like this dependency, this literal dependency with our adult caregivers, we end up being shaped by that, by what we take on and how we adapt to the way they show up. And this is so deeply consequential, related to our relationship with our own experiences, because we're not trained in being embodied. We're trained in avoidance and suppression and interpretation and meaning making, that in most cases is filtered through this whole landscape of fear and self-hatred and hatred of other people and distrust and this kind of vigilance and delusion, um, based on projection and a misunderstanding of self and of self. And this is for me where it's like I like teaching about sex because we have to talk about all this stuff. Like it's impossible for me to support somebody in experiencing what we call limitless sex without going deep into this stuff related to nervous system awareness and trauma healing and um, inner alchemy, sublimation, all these different things that we've been touching on today. So there's a part of me that's actually like covert in my orientation towards I could say like personal and leadership development or collective healing or social systemic change because it's promise, it's compelling, especially when working with a more mainstream audience. It's not like we're going to have, this isn't like a process of spiritual awakening and deconditioning and trauma healing. This is a promise they're going to have better sex. People are like, cool, I want that. I identify with that. I'm down. And then it's like, okay, cool. Now we're in. Rock and
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and I'm also like the part of me is also like, yeah, and better sex is well worth the ticket of admission. I mean, that's who does. I mean, that's
totally,
a fine and noble goal is to have the best sex possible.
totally, totally. Yeah. And it's definitely just been part of my personal journey that a big part of my incentives actually have been very like sex focused, like I want to understand. When I was younger, like there was like this obsession of like how do I like solve the puzzle of like absolute sexual satisfaction for women. Like that was the goal. It was like how do I do that? Like what do I need to know? What do I need to do to be to offer to provide complete sexual fulfillment for a woman? Like literally complete completion. That it was like, what is that? 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 I need that. I need that. I need that. And a lot of it was like a mixture of insecurity and um, some sense of like a lack of self-worth or whatever, like a issue related to approval and belonging. That it's like, oh, if I figure out that, then I'm going to be okay. If I know how to do that, then I belong or someone will love me or whatever. And there was also a component of it that is almost devotional, I would say, that a lot of men I think can relate to the coinciding factors of like there's a deep love and desire to provide and almost like a devotional orientation to relating to women and to the feminine and to God, and this is a altar for that or whatever, mixed up with this stuff like this unworthiness stuff and this fear and this stuff related to belonging and acceptance and being lovable and all that too. So yeah, mm, where I started with that is that I started to unravel so many truths about embodiment and consciousness and self, kind of catalyzed a really full on journey of awakening in myself because I just wanted to get the answers to those questions. And then it turned into a much deeper and more important and fulfilling investigation that ultimately resulted in the same thing anyways. But it was like, it wasn't like, oh, like how do I heal? Like what is the nature of my soul and like of God or whatever? That is also something that I've been in an investigation of, I think, in various ways throughout my life. But the thing that was like, this has so much fucking energy. Like this is the thing that I want to focus my time and energy and money and intellect and relationships on is like figuring this out. And there was enough like slipstream or fuel or energization of that it really opened for me. And I've seen this happen with a lot of guys, women too, but a lot of guys. And this is also true with pickup, actually, with like cold approach pickup, that it's like a lot of guys are just like, I want to know how to talk to girls. I want to be able to like have sex with all the women that I see that I'm attracted to, or at least some of them. and and there's enough energy in that intention and desire for men to have a very meaningful conversation about the way they are and are not taking responsibility for themselves. And I've seen so much beauty in the pickup community around this, where it really is just like a portal into a very, very meaningful conversation about personal development and integrity.
Mm.
There's this sweet little thing I keep thinking, listening to you, about how so much of my life, yeah, the feeling of like I'm not, I want to have more sex or something, or like,
Yeah.
uh uh I want to have more sex.
Yeah.
That actually, the like the yearning underneath that is like, I want to be okay. Like I want to, it's,
Yeah. Or like, I want
and
to be whole. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that for many reasons, it's like it's hard to see that yearning underneath. I'll just speak for myself, I guess.
Mm.
Like my sex drive is that real, and what makes that desire so desperate is that it does feel so integral to, am I okay?
Mm.
Yes. Yes. It's incredible what you bring up. Like, this is such an important thing that I think influences men so much. This confusion and shame, where it's like I think so many men end up feeling emasculated or um, suppressed, or like they don't allow to be as vital and horny as they are because they think there's something wrong with them, where it's like, oh, I can't want that. Like, that's not okay. I can't want to go talk to all these women or have sex with all of these women. There's something wrong with me, and there's something so profound about the pickup community just being like, go, like, follow
Mm.
that, do that. Like, I think it's so affirming to young men to just have a community of people that are being like, yes, that, do that, like, go fully into that. And I'm not I'm not advising this. I think it's not necessarily like the ultimate path for people to, become pickup artists or whatever. That's not at all my suggestion. But what I'm wanting to highlight here is the significance and specifically the contrast of something that celebrates male sexuality as something that we do not get a lot of. It's so unusual in this world to experience a celebration of male sexuality, especially immature male sexuality.
Mm.
It's so big. Like, I think immature male sexuality does not get celebrated or accepted and approved of for what it is. And that's what it is. You're a young man, you're still maturing, and you're sexual. And that's the deal. Like, that just is the deal. There's nothing wrong with you. That's
Mm.
how it is. Like, it would be absurd to assume that they either like should be asexual or sexually mature, when, especially if you're opening up into these like gifts of affect and influence and sexual power, and you don't know how to like wave your magic wand correctly yet. Like, how could you? You're learning. We need to accommodate and accept and embrace that this is the reality for men, for young men, especially for men that have a certain kind of devotional or erotic appetite.
Mm.
And it's just so harmful, I think, because I think it creates
Mm.
fracturing in our world, because there are men that just know, I cannot listen to you. I cannot be suppressed and emasculated in the way that you're suggesting I ought to be. So I'm not even going to listen to this conversation about like accountability and consent, or like, whatever stuff, because I'm not I'm not going to take that on. I cannot. I know that this is imperative for who I am and what I'm becoming. And I think this, yeah, the insistence that like you can't be like this, or you have to grow up, or like this is not okay, or whatever, creates so much fragmentation and polarization, and it's rough for sure. Um, there was something that I missed back there. Let me see if I can catch it. Yeah, so another factor that I think is worth mentioning, and I'm curious if we're going to run out of time here and we want to talk more about like sex specific stuff, might be helpful for people to hear, interesting, or a way to wrap this up more in a thing that grounds and has more use. Um, yeah, the thing that I was going to say is I think that what we were just talking about, and also other factors and forces beyond this, affect this kind of like pussy crazed thing that a lot of men experience and a lot of people observe in men, where we, in the absence of like being deeply affirmed and validated in who we are, that there's something in us that's seeking to get that external validation from women. So like, and this can result in, you know, this kind of hungry ghost situation where men are like unaware that they're trying to like fill this missing piece, and they end up just like going on this kind of, you know, multi-decade playboy escapade trying to find affirmation of themselves. But I think that this is potentially related to our fragmentation from like tribe and community, that men are not, they don't feel affirmed in who they are, and certainly not in their sexuality. There's so much anti-male sentiment and so much anti-male sexuality sentiment that I think it responds by subconsciously seeking to get affirmed. And like, what better way to just like pursue having sexual contact with hundreds of women so that I get the info that I don't have, that I need for a healthy ego and a healthy sense of self. And I think this is so intelligent, and I don't mean to say that I think that this is the best way to approach it, because I don't, on many levels I don't, but I just feel compelled to validate that there's something in that that's brilliant, of like you have been violated and abused, and there's something in you that refuses to take that on as your identity, so you're trying to figure out how to get this information. Awesome. And again, the hungry ghost thing often happens where people, even if that affirmation was right in front of them, they can't take it in because they're not in their bodies in a way where that information can land. And they also don't really know how to make love to women, so that deep kind of irrefutable transmission of adoration and trust comes through. So that's another factor. And ultimately, I do think that we should be sourcing our own approval. So that's another thing too, where it's like, yeah, it's not ultimately the thing, but like this is, again, this is not true developmentally. Like we do literally need exogenous imprints about our worth and our identity as we form our sense of self. And yeah, so there's some thoughts there's many tangents here, but I want to kind of pass it back to you, as I know that we are gonna soon run out of time here, and I wonder if
Yeah.
you have some things that you are tracking for how we might want to spend this limited time.
I have a burning share.
I'm
Hell yeah.
excited.
um, when you that was such a beautiful offering you just made. Uh, I I feel like I had this incredible insight into um as I was going through like immature but like male sexual being phase. I think I had so much messaging that male sexual desire was like like bad. At
Yeah.
best, at best it was like necessary. for the continuance of the human race or something. But like someday we'll have figure it out, and it'll it's like I
Yes.
had so much.
Yes.
Yeah,
Someday men will either be asexual or feminine. Like
right.
that's the narrative, right? It's like
Yeah,
you need to stop being so masculine and so manly, or you just need to not have any kind of gender expression at all.
right. And so I like again like to loop us back. I think there was an appropriateness level and a shame level to like
Mm.
tamping down.
Hmm.
But then I think what ended up happening, the like lessons that you're developmentally come with being an immature young male who wants to fuck a lot. You learn a lot of lessons about like this is how you go up to someone and
Yeah.
introduce yourself and say, "Hey, how do you do? Like, what's your sign?" You know, like there's just tons of skills that you learn about. Like, no, man, you just kind of have to go up and
Yeah.
get it how you live, and that's like
Yeah.
the way that the world works. There's like a charging forth that and like a ownership of your desire, and it's shadowy maybe sometimes, or you know there's like
Yeah.
inelegant ways it will happen, but that is massively important for
Completely.
yeah. And so
Completely.
when that gets
Completely.
distorted down, then the, each successive phase now is like carrying these wounds and
Mm.
has like underdeveloped tools. So like
Yes.
now now I have to do this higher order work with sex, and I don't even know like I don't have as like the I don't even have the muscles ready to yeah. Anyway, so it really connected me to like I think for me like I'm almost shaking right now. I think that is like a really important insight for what like
Mm.
what
Yeah.
you were bringing up for each other. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like we have this culture of shaming men for learning,
Yeah.
where it seems to me like the architecture or the proposal of this kind of cultural theme that we're describing here is shaming men for the process of learning how to be mature men.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And ouch. And like how is that gonna like what is I understand that there's like there are levels of this, right? Like if we're not in any way suggesting that it's like permissive to like assault people or whatever, like that's not. I think that there's important guardrails related to consent and this sort of stuff that I think are really wise, that it's clear that a orientation to relating with people sexually ought to have unambiguous consent. And, beyond that, it would be of interest for me to see more understanding of the difficulty or even the inevitable reality of what it is to learn how to embody and wield sexual power for people, but in this case men specifically.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard. It's fucking hard to do. And learning is messy. Like if you watch a baby, you'll see like learning is messy. We have lots of missteps and like fumbles and wobbles and wiggles, and that's just learning. That's how it is for these biological systems. We learning's messy, and the demonization of that is extremely confusing for men and harmful for our world. And yeah, it's something that I feel very passionate about is um, and the other side of it too is like how this plays into like victim stuff, where there's this like golden ticket to just like project and be a victim when interacting with a man who's still learning and in a phase of immaturity. And I think that's super disempowering for women and is confusing. I think it's deeply confusing to grow up inside of a context that is actively promoting victim consciousness and demonization of men. And yeah, this is nuanced and something that I try to be really careful in choosing my words for many reasons. One being a male bodied person talking about this, that it seems like it's in many ways it's easier for women to hear this from women, and it feels like a really important kind of elder sister role that I see so many women doing incredibly well, is communicating with other women the harmfulness of this thing that they promote or live inside of, that it's hard. It creates so much damage for everybody. And I also feel very inspired to support men, myself included, in how to navigate a landscape where we don't end up in feeling victimized ourselves by this theme, and this thing that you might encounter as you live your life of projection, basically, and attempts at emasculation and disrespect. To hold that nobly and healthfully and with responsibility is also important for us getting out of this polarization and projection field.
That's such a hopeful note to take us out on.
Cool.
I'm feeling so much gratitude for you, Rob.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's weird. When I woke up this morning, I didn't expect to like be in this moment
Mm.
of the conversation we just had, and like how relevant it is, how deeply relevant it is to our journey. And I think maybe more Jonathan's journey, but like how deeply that affects my journey, like our connection, the we creature that is us. And yeah, I mean, just I feel like we just went on a journey together. Like um I was like going in between, like being like feeling very like involved, and then like in this like deep witnessing of these like, I don't know, it was like a beautiful 90-minute session. Great way to start a Wednesday.
Yeah, the masculine in me is grateful that the feminine was satisfied.
Well, and also, yeah, I mean, I think I didn't, it's like I didn't so deeply see like my own journey of listening through, Jonathan's challenge, and then like feeling, activated by it, triggered by it, like my own wounds brought up. But then like that kind of settling down, and like now being coming to this place of like, oh my God, you poor boys. Like, what are we going to do about these boys? I gotta help them. Like, what about my 5-year-old? Like, how do we make sure he has like, like a positive sexual experience? Like, fuck. Like now I'm like, I want to help. How can I help?
Amazing. Well, I can, just easily kind of highlight or bookmark several things that feel inspiring for me to explore with you all on or off camera here with what you just described. Like, how do we actually support parents and young people with this exact situation? Like, it's so important, and I think it's a place that can be of tremendous consequence, is providing resources and containers and services and opportunities around this particular thing is huge, and something that I feel pulled into more and more. I feel a lot of passion around this in part because of how much of a disaster my adolescence was, unrelated to this sexual topic, but just in general. So that's one thing. Another is your female experience and the female experience with regards to all this stuff that we've been touching. It seems like we've been more focused on the male side of things, and I'm curious about that and would be super interested to hear from you and for you to kind of reveal more about that and share some insights about what it's like for a woman or for women with regards to these various things. And then the last thing I can highlight here is sex specific stuff is really fun and juicy to talk about. And I can imagine that for listeners, it might be pretty abstract at this point of, I don't, who knows where people's backgrounds are, how it translates automatically, but just a sense of like, okay, we're talking about a lot of like high level conceptual theoretic stuff and almost like a cultural critique layer. Um, but like, what do I do? Like in sex, like in the bedroom, as they say. That for me is also something that I find to be super energizing and important, is taking a lot of this information that a lot of people have in these other areas of their life, especially if they've, hung out in the like somatic trauma healing world or with circling and authentic relating stuff. Like, how do we take these skills and capacities and understandings that we have that we can put into practice in other contexts, into embodied, relational, emergent experience?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So maybe this is, not us wrapping up as we thought we might be, but this is just kind of intro part two.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, whoa, that's like a lot to
Yeah.
consider.
Yeah, maybe we do another call. Would you be open to another call?
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah,
That's
Totally.
so
that's
awesome.
fun.
It's very
Yeah, it's
fun.
fun.
We'll do a mega-sode.
A mega
Yeah,
Yeah.
fun. Cool. Totally. Yeah, I mean, again, like I do think that these three topics at least are we could spend a whole call on each of them.
Yeah, like I something that I can't get out of my mind right now is like thinking about as a middle school teacher, so with boys in their sixth, seventh, eighth grade years of life, and
Oof.
especially eighth graders, like the full on puberty, um and being in a classroom with those kids, like just yeah, I would love to talk about some of the experiences I had around that, and like
Mm-hmm.
corralling, and just
Mm-hmm.
like recognizing the rampant sexual energy, and then like being a woman in a room full of this, and
Mm-hmm.
like how to navigate that skillfully and artfully, and like I think that could help people to, yeah, like to have that conversation. It
Mm.
Hell yeah.
certainly helped me, because I remember having
Hell
these
yeah.
conversations like um yeah, I just remember being like very explicit about like, we cannot be so, like talking about like how sexual they were being, and like, we can't do this, we're in a
Yeah,
school, you guys, you
totally.
know
Totally.
um but not knowing quite what to do, like
Yeah, and I think that parents, caregivers, teachers probably experience a lot of shame and a lot of hiding, and they don't, like, people don't talk about this because they're concerned about saying the wrong thing or revealing
right,
that like I'm a pervert or whatever. So like I'm just gonna like literally not talk about it even though it's in my classroom every day, because if I bring it up with my colleagues or with my supervisors or with my friends, then they might judge me, or it might reveal that there's something wrong with me, and I can't let that get out. So I think this is just literally the thing that's everywhere. I would guess that it's more the norm, that this is what a majority of people are experiencing, is like confusion, shame, like inability to know how to handle the situation correctly, and
yeah.
hiding,
When
not talking about
like kind of as a joke, there was a teacher I worked with who would always tell the students, turn to page 70 and then go one page back, so that he wouldn't have to say turn to page 69, because of how that would like create this.
it. Yeah.
Mm.
This thing about kids is so big. Like
Yeah, it really is. Oh,
it's like people are literally being indoctrinated into this like hellscape today, right now, around this country and this planet. People are like literally being like, shamanically initiated into this shadow field today. Like right now,
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah.
Right now.
What follows is our third interview with Rob. And as we were talking over how we want that conversation to go, we were seeing what felt workable. And then that word itself kind of grew into the topic of the conversation. What exactly is workability, especially in a spiritual and personal development context? It turns out it's actually a really deep insight into what makes up our sexual mystic practice. And it all begins with Rob questioning a big sacred cow in this field, which is the idea of catharsis. And he questions its actual value. It's such a masterful doorway into these lower levels of the practice.
Yeah, I can jam on that a little bit just to see if something happens. It's interesting. So yeah, I notice like when we talk about what is workable, one thing that comes up is catharsis and the place of catharsis, where in different modalities and schools of thought, there's this orientation where like if something is unworkable, just move the unworkable energy, like go into it. Like if you're just so triggered and projecting, then fully be triggered and project, like cough it up, like let it all out. And yeah, that can be very useful. But I also think that people maybe get a little too overzealous with this approach. And what I've seen in the let's say most cutting edge science around it is that catharsis might actually not be helpful, that it might like reify and habituate us to certain pathways of escalation and fear response, essentially, where we're having like an adrenalized type of expression rather than dropping in to what might be underneath it. While at the same time, I've seen that in myself and in lots of settings, like in groups and working with people one on one, that um, that sometimes the movement back is harder than the movement forwards, and then seeing what happens after we've just let it out. So that's one thing that I'm curious about in different. Let me see if I can turn my notification. Yeah, and just like thinking about like what is useful and what is helpful in relating and in group process and in things like circling or whatever is like, what are we, what ideas or models or beliefs or you know knowledge might we have about how to be with what comes up. And yeah, I from what I've seen, it seems like when there is a lot of like shutdown or freeze or somebody's system is unable to express itself because of different traumatic experiences or epigenetics or who knows where we pick stuff up. But if there is a feeling of like an inability to express or to move with natural impulses, it does seem like catharsis serves a purpose to kind of like open those channels and let there be an imprint that like expression is okay, that even if I'm triggered and below the line, that it's safe, that I'm not like that everything that comes can be welcome and loved and held in relationship. And the counter to that would be that it seems like there's a level of like indulgence and emotional immaturity and kind of just like missing the opportunity where we could really slow down and explore meeting what is from a much more subtle and dropped in place with like safety and like coherence in a group field or in a pairing or something. So yeah, this is immediately one topic that comes that's really rich when we're talking about what is workable, because from what I've seen, sometimes I think this can be confusing for people, certainly has been for me in the past, that sometimes the most quote unquote workable is to continue with the acceleration or escalation of the thing. And I think most of the time that's not true. And yeah, how to hold this as a practitioner and as a person is interesting. And it immediately can weave into sex, the topic that we seem to orbit around but not fully like grab our hands into when we have been having these conversations, where it's like when somebody is touching like a strong like frustration type of energy, or like angst, or like overt horniness that appears as though it wants to be expressed as like hard fucking or like physical aggression or something like that, that yeah, it can be really important to move with those energies, especially if you never have and you don't know that it's safe to go into those certain kinds of ranges. So there could be some programming just like running in the background, maybe even permanently or something. The body can be stuck or frozen with some old information or something like that. Um, and then the alternative model might be that, like in slow sex or whatever, that sublimation is always the way. That like anytime there is a sensation, emotion, impulse, that the thing to do is to explore how you can make space for that to just circulate and sublimate into a subtlety that doesn't involve any or maybe just very little physical movement. So yeah, this can be a very interesting thing. And I've seen both things where I've been working with someone where they were experiencing so much sexual frustration, was the language that he used, and maybe like a kind of conflict between him and his partner, where when he got really horny, he just had this intense feeling that when he felt that it couldn't just naturally move, that it turned into frustration and aggression and this kind of angst, almost like being trapped in his own skin, and feeling like his horniness was almost like driving him mad or something. And it seemed like for his partner, this made her feel really uncomfortable, because it was like she was wanting slowness and calm, and even if she did like these more um, aggressive kinds of sexual expression, that it wasn't feeling right for her, that it just felt like she was like, this is weird. And yeah, the thing that seemed to really open stuff for this particular man was actually going the other direction. It was like, okay, let's see how you can open your body and feel whatever this is. And then he ended up arriving with something under it, like that under it was grief and some other stuff too, but like a feeling of loss or sadness or hopelessness and fear, something like this. But he just kept feeling like he had to whenever he would get super horny. And yeah, I think that can be super confusing for people, that we don't understand the difference between our sexual essence, and how our sexual energy can kind of run through all these different personas, where um, we're in a fear response essentially. That I think a lot of people have no idea that the kind of sexual experiences or impulses that they have um, might be some sort of distorted or contorted movement of essence, rather than something that really is about who they really are. So yeah, I can imagine that this is something that people will identify with, that in my own journey, my own quest to understand this stuff, there's definitely been a lot of back and forth of like, okay, let's try the catharsis thing and see what happens, to be like, okay, that just feels like it just goes on forever, or like doesn't end, or creates disconnection, that when I go in that direction, I'm alone. Nobody can be with me there. And then there's been other times where moving with that energy is incredibly liberating, that it's like my system just feels relieved of just like, oh, like it's okay to really bodify these energies and let them move and be in connection when they're here. so yeah, I think that this is probably pretty relatable for a lot of men, and seeking to understand what is their sexual essence or like their natural sexuality, and what are we could say things that when we choose these pathways or whatever, they're not likely to result in us experiencing the kinds of things that we want, which, connection being one of them, a sense of having like a shared reality or a workable meeting point or something.
Mm.
And yeah, I think we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but maybe not. I found it to be a very useful model in teaching to talk about limited or limitless sex. And I think it's kind of clunky, but it's been very, very helpful for people to just kind of look at like, okay, is the way that you're approaching this either like in a sexual experience or like in your sexual life, something that keeps expanding into greater goodness, love, pleasure, connection, abundance, or not, as a very binary like this thing, like which group does it end up in? Is it limited or is it limitless? Does it have the capacity to keep expanding into something more and more beautiful and desirable, or no? Yeah.
Man, there's so much there, and I noticed my immediately what I'm identifying with is not actually a sexual situation, but recently I was blown out in a circle for the first time in a pretty long time. I haven't really felt super blown out in a while, and like it actually took me like an hour or so afterwards to be like, "Oh, I'm blown out." I didn't even realize like that's what this
Mm,
feeling is I'm just like totally unworkable in this thing. In the moment it felt workable and it felt like I was able to make a lot of space for it and welcome in things that someone else was bringing to me and like and then having this experience in the afterwards as it was like dawning on me that I was just blown out and not in a workable space, I guess you could say, by being blown
mm,
out, is that like I didn't want to be blown out. I mean that's obvious, right? That this like almost it's like an implicit part of being in like an unworkable space is that you don't want to be there. But it actually I think really bears some sitting with in that like
mm,
what actually made it unworkable was not any of the sensations I had or the thoughts I had. It was my lack of desire to be there. You know, it was like I just did not want to be there. And then I was thinking about times I've been blown out in the past and knowing like, oh yeah, it's gonna be days maybe of like thinking over this and ruminating and it's like I don't want to do I don't want days of thinking about this and being like feeling icky and like
mm,
I don't want it. And it was like it's so simple, but somehow it feels like it has escaped me a lot. Just I don't want to be here, and that almost is the unworkability of it. And then
mm.
yeah, I don't know how that where that takes us, but that's really where I'm resonating is this kind of like non-sexual example of what you're talking about.
I think sometimes I've seen this in myself and in lots of people, that there is actually like a, I'm not interested in taking responsibility for this, or I don't want to learn right now.
Mm,
Fuck you. Like that kind of, it
yeah.
can be helpful to, I've seen this in my own, let's say, coaching practice a lot, that sometimes it can be helpful to kind of like back up and to look like, okay, is this something that you want to explore? Are you open to learning something here? Are you committed to learning something here and taking responsibility for what you're creating?
Mm,
And it can be very helpful to not assume the answer, even for us like spiritual athletes, to be like, yeah, like, am I actually open? Like, no, fuck that guy. Like that. it's like, yeah, I feel that way sometimes, and I think that it can be very empowering to just accept that, like, that just is how it is,
Mm.
and yeah, I've noticed this in relating with my partner where the awareness of, like, right now I don't care about your feelings. It's like, okay, that's a good thing to be aware of. I don't want to approach a conversation when that's how I'm feeling. So
Mm.
good to know that, like, right now I actually just feel self-righteous and indignant and I don't care about your experience.
Mhm.
It's just like, okay, that's probably not a place for us to have a constructive and useful exploration. Okay. And, you know,
Yeah,
um, hmm,
something that's reminded, that's like attaching to a recent lesson I had, that I'm feeling like that lesson wasn't fully embraced, and so we're on like another loop of it, and it's getting like more and more intense until
hmm,
I just listen to the teacher. We were
hmm,
at an event, where like a multi-day event, and like I had this repeated experience of like checking in, being like, oh yeah, I don't like this, I don't feel connected to the other people here, like I and then noticing I was having self-judgment about like I shouldn't be not having a good time, or like I should.
hmm,
It was like I had this expectation of
hmm,
myself to be like, I can figure
hmm,
out the way to be engaged and like enjoying this, and it's like,
hmm,
yeah, it's like a struggle to get over this like middle ground between learning tools and ways of interacting with energy that makes a lot more things workable, and like where the edge is to push into like pushing past, no, I can't do this, or I don't want to do this.
hmm,
That's like so much of my learning over
hmm,
the course of several years has been pushing into that edge and being
hmm,
like, I'm not trusting myself when I'm like, I'm no, I don't want to, this is
hmm,
stupid. It's like, move past that guy. But then there's also like there's some coming back home to like yes, and then at a certain point you've tested the edge enough that you can trust your no, and you can discern a no, and like you can just be a no for a while, or to,
hmm.
however long it takes. There's like I notice, even just saying this now, I'm like, that feels edgy again. It's like I found a new edge in this, like,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, this is juicy. This for me is very much like at the uh it's in front of me on a regular basis, and I could describe
Mm.
it as like I think there's a couple ways I could talk about it. One of them is like when is like feeling feelings or like processing them just indulgence and like a waste of time and I could just let it go. And when is trying to let something go resistance and avoidance, that it's like that can be, it's such a deep journey of self-awareness where like, is this actually something that needs to be moved or met, or is this something that just
Mm.
is irrelevant and I can just let it go and it doesn't matter, like that crux is such a deep exploration that for me is like, one of the biggest demands of self-awareness, to be able to discern, like, is this just, and especially as a facilitator, to like bring the sword or like redirect to somebody who's in indulgence can be confusing because they're like, I thought you just were coaching everybody to feel their feelings, like, what are you talking, this doesn't make any sense, so there is nuance here, and I think that there's a lot of communities and practices that go too far in one direction almost by default or tendency, and I think that actually is an issue. I think that it doesn't work, for one, like that's not actually how our bodies are designed, and I think in it not working it can create all kinds of incoherence and distrust and fragmentation of a field, that can be so hugely consequential and frankly confusing for people, where they, especially when people are learning, it's like not holding that nuance and the complexity can just be super confusing, where it's like, I think I have observed a tremendous amount of indulgence in people that are familiar with like body-based practices and presence-based practices, that it seems like people just get stuck in processing forever. And it's like there's no space for creativity or expansion because we're just processing forever. And it's like, when can you just flush the toilet and move on? You know, like are we processed enough? Like, do we actually need to go into that, or is that just part of the addiction? You know, like part of the addiction of being upset or finding ways to bond or relate or have belonging that are based on like distress and fear and entanglement and drama. You know, I think that the whole upper limits thing is often a big factor here, where it's like, can we just be in expansive harmony and abundance together and still have the fabric of our lives woven? Or do we need to be in these denser, more contractive and drama based entanglements? So I think
Yes.
that's
Yes
one
and yes.
factor.
I think that yes to the harmony and yes to the drama. Like I think there's that both of those things are part of the like the the ever evolving like expansion of a person that is incarnated in a body. Like you have like I have this sense that you've got to go in to like pull up to then bring out and create. Like it's like a harvest. Like there's the time to harvest and there's the time to expand with what like you did harvest.
Mm.
And I my experience, at least thus far, and I'm a novice at best on this path, is that the expansion time gets to be bigger like as you move forward, and then the harvest is like a little more contracted. Like there's um
Mm.
that's my experience. Sorry, I just feel like I butted in. I got very passionate just then about that.
Yeah, I felt that passion. I really felt that as you were like moving your body. I was like, yeah, that there's like this in and out energetics that I was like
Yeah, in and out.
feeling
Like
as
there's
you were doing it.
yeah, I feel maybe like almost defensive of it because of what I think, because of something I'm going through right now. And so now I'm questioning my own. I'm like, am I just trying to defend my current state? But I don't think so. I experienced a relatively long period of time where things felt very easy and harmonious and big and like um I remember a time where I was every day, every single day, having to work with these like painful, difficult emotions. And it was months and months on end, this intense layer upon layer of just like, when is this suffering gonna subside? And I would literally lay on my couch in my office, this practice I did every day, and just like let myself feel it. Um, and not even related to any one particular thing. And then over time that like the amount of time I needed like to do that practice lessened, and I've had this relatively even you know
Hmm.
length of time, and then something big came in, and now it's like, oh, and now I'm at a place where I'm like, oh, okay, I know what this means. It means it's time to like this is the time to feel this intensity, and like let it pass through me and let it work its way through me, and there's a lesson here, and like I'm gonna put some of my mind on like figuring out what the lesson is to harvest. um and then there's like some sort of artfulness and not letting that become everything and like this huge trauma, but knowing that I will step out of this period as into like another phase of harmony. I hope. I hope so.
Can relate to some things that you shared for sure. There was several extended chapters in my journey where there was a lot of just like nowhere to go, but just like be in the soup of intense sensations, like just I think in some ways it's like the process of landing in my body was like, okay, you have to develop the capacity to presence this stuff, to be with it, and to help the body learn that it's safe to feel, to to be embodied, to be embodied, and to trust what that is about. Yeah, and during that time, it seemed like there was no like, I don't know about no, but there was very minimal place for like consciousness work in a certain way, that it felt like it was so much just about like body, like just be in your body, just be in your body and learn how to be in your body without tipping over into fear response and, depression, anxiety cycles.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Something that's rising in me right now is this desire to link in morality, which I'm becoming like a big booster for. I'm like become a big morality booster. Yeah.
Proponent of morality.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Morality and workable. We're having our vocab lessons here. Like, what is workable? What is morality? And what is this
Yeah.
word stuff we're doing?
I noticed that in a lot of this like spiritual exploration going on in the 21st century,
Hmm.
a lot of it happens by default in sort of a like a post morality space, by which I mean traditional like exterior moral systems that used to anchor and hold a lot of spiritual
Yeah, cool.
exploration. Like that doesn't really hold for us now, and
Mhm.
I think that there's a general sense that in this kind of perennial philosophy way, we all carry a sense of morality in us that is sort of more internal. And the fear I have, or fear, I think a critique I have, well, I think that past, um, there's a lot of ways to like embrace morality, which I would say would be like exterior to yourself and shared among people, the guidelines to how to make choices, how to live in a way that manages impact and aligns spirit
Mm.
and body, like aligns material and divine natures. So when we rely on ourselves to bring that inside of us, then that's always like we're never actually truly accountable, because it like can always shift and flicker and kind of take on tones based on like mood and on what we ate or didn't eat, or I mean there's just like a million different things. So that when we find ourselves in these exploratory processes where we're trying to negotiate inner work and just harmonizing with the field, to me that sounds like a perfect place for some sort of like uh yeah, to me there's a confrontation there between self and other, which morality is like one technology that can
Hmm.
work that connection.
Hmm.
um and that there is like without that, we it feels like a very slippery, um it feels like this slippery negotiation that's sort of like,
Yeah.
when is it ever not going to be just ultimately an addictive or like high
Hmm.
chasing thing where it's
Yeah.
like, I want
Yeah.
harmony now because I want to get off, or like I want to go inside because I want to indulge myself. It's like, yeah, there's some
Hmm.
lack of external shared explicit holding that I think, yeah, I want to add into the picture
Hmm.
game.
I'm not totally sure that I'm on the same page as you, but I'm having interesting things happen to me as I'm listening.
Mhm. I love that.
Yeah, I'm seeing different images and having a lot of like parallel shoots of like different tangents or adjacent things to jam on. Shall I indulge some of them? See what happens.
Yeah.
One thing that comes up is like how much we have let go of our traditional ethics and morals, and replaced them with these pretty contemporary ones that seem to not be very like fleshed out or integrated in a way. Like one clear example, or I don't know if it's a clear example or something to play around with, is sexual liberation and the whole like sexual liberation movement and stuff that's all like pro sex work and pro promiscuity, and how this is also a very gendered thing in many cases. And that for me is often one of the places that I have a maybe sometimes a reaction, I could say. Sometimes I felt triggered in the past, and other times I just feel kind of distrustful and like, I don't think that's a good model. Like, and like some metrics for that is like what happens when you take this behavior and you add it to time or another kind of scale, right? Where it's like, if a society acts like this or you just act like this for a long time, is that good for people? Like, is that is that the kind of world that we all want to live in? Like that, it's like, yeah, sexual liberation is important. And like when we take the kind of patterns, like actually just like this pattern replicated over and over again through time equals outcome. And that is like, it's not so clear that the like approach to sexual liberation that a lot of people take and the values that they hold and their morality and ethics around it are actually in service to love or to life. It's like, it's hard to make an argument that it is, that like a lot of what people are doing in it with their sexuality or sexual energy is not sustainable. And maybe it's not meant to be. And like there is just, people have all sorts of arguments around like capitalism sucks, so fuck you patriarchy, give me a paycheck or something. Or I've been so suppressed or oppressed for so long, and now I just want to do whatever I want and like flaunt it or whatever. Just as two of many, many, many examples that I could come up with, that this is also not popular opinion, right? Like speaking in any kind of controversial or negative way against a lot of these tropes or themes or patterns in our society is something that I think can cause upset and trigger and fragmentation of our communities. It's like, wait, what are you saying? Like, are you yucking my yum or whatever? Like that sort of thing. And it's like, well, maybe if we're having a conversation around what sort of ethic or morality supports the kind of world that we all want to live in, maybe I am. Like like what place is like how can we contextualize these things as anything more than like transitional technologies or like a stepping stone when we're looking at collective and personal and interpersonal healing and evolution? It's like when I see what people are doing and the way that they interface with social media and the way that they organize their lives and their finances and their relationships and the the factual information about how polyamory plays out over time and how much people in their values of independence and liberation often result in like loneliness and then like a lack of cohesive interpersonal relationships over the course of a lifetime. And it's like, yeah, like theoretically that's a cute idea, but in practice it's not setting us up for the kind of world where we're all happy and abundant and well resourced. So that's kind of like, yeah, it's tricky. And one of the places where I think it's helpful and very pragmatic to just look at like, okay, what are these values, or as you're saying, like morals or ethics, what do they do over the course of your life? Or if everybody acted like that, or like, yeah, like, is that a good world? I think no. Like, I think that we would not be in a good place if everybody was all about some of these kind of morals that a lot of folks seem to value as like their, cutting edge pioneers of the evolution of consciousness, where it's like, yeah, make a case for it. I don't think that it's hard to do.
Mm.
Hearing that, I would say that you both are on the same page.
Yeah.
Like what you're
Hmm.
describing is what I know Jonathan to
Rant about.
rant about.
Cool.
Is what's not being said. To rant on. Yeah, I mean something that I think an insight I have had recently is like I was at an event that was talking about sex magic, and
Oh my gosh.
framed it around this like manifesting practice that involved masturbation in a group setting. And I noticed that like um if
Hmm.
if you find something sacred and magical and like powerful, how do you behave around that? Do you behave around it with mere permissivity? I would say the opposite. I like if
Hmm.
I would think that you would actually protect it and hold it in ceremony as much as possible,
Hmm.
and you would probably do a lot of things to make yourself worthy before entering that holiest of holies.
We're so bad at that as a society right now. Like,
Yeah.
I think that the sanctity of most things has just been completely disintegrated in spirit of commercialism for one, and like flexing. Like,
Mm,
there's so much degradation and like a lack of sanctity in our world, with everything from like drug use to sex to group sex to entheogenic rituals and sex magic and all of these things that have so much potency, and that we're like working with life force and with the fabric of the universe in very full on and intensive ways, has in many contexts just been kind of appropriated for whatever the fuck. It's like you can
mm,
sell it or you'll look cool or whatever, is like, yeah, it's like, show me something that hasn't happened to, and it's very few. And the things that I think it has, it's partially baked into the thing itself, where and it's like real devotion and commitment and relationship is one of those things where I feel like it's baked into the code of what that is. Another interesting one is iboga, where it seems like iboga is one of the very few entheogenic plants that you can't fuck with in that way. Like, you can't like, the way that you can like take mushrooms and go to a party or like eat edibles every day. It's like you cannot do that with iboga. It's like baked into the thing itself that you can't abuse it. And
mm,
I think almost everything isn't like that. Like ayahuasca, DMT, mushrooms, cannabis especially. It's almost like she voluntarily is like, sure, who wants to use me? However you want to. That it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, LSD is incredibly useful as a tool, and it's also like something that you can really waste time, if not fuck up your life, by using different molecules and plants and mushrooms and stuff in a way that's not super constructive. And I would say the same thing is true with sex and with ritual magic and all kinds of stuff, is that like, you know, it's like we gave power tools to teenagers and they're fucking running around on Instagram like looking cool and making money.
mm. Yeah. I love that. That has me think like there's almost a have you ever heard of discernment of spirits? It's like this old school skill saints used to have where like one person was like channeling spirits and it would take a whole other person to be like that's a demon, or no, that's a good one, let's listen to this one he's channeling right now. Like that took a whole
Yeah.
other guy.
Yeah.
It's a completely different job because channeling is just considered like so much work, I guess, that it's like
Well, it's also so much surrender.
right.
Like,
And
you don't have that part of your like that faculty isn't online, the discernment thing. So I can see that for sure.
yeah. So then I love, there's like different ways you could bring that into your own life, but I think something I notice is like I have developed um I noticed this at that event I was just talking about, where I have developed this heuristic where if a spiritual insight or like calling feels really true but also feels really difficult to say yes to, then I trust it.
Mm,
Whereas if it feels really easy, no matter how true it feels, like if it feels really easy to do and really
mm.
like sexy and fun, then I uh have caution.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wise man. Hell
I
yeah.
think that's like a good
It's
rubric of
so
like,
good because it's like, the same thing. I've heard the same thing said in circles where people are really about open relating and sexual liberation, where it's like the naturalness of attraction is the value. Like that's the ethic.
mm,
It's
mm,
like, oh, there's attraction. It's like, okay. Like it's like, like I've spent months, if not years, in that place myself, and or at least traversing communities where that was just kind of the ethos or the culture where, and I think that there's so much confusion around this where people are exploring open relating or something like that, but then like they're triggered, but their partner is like, oh, it's just so natural or whatever, like I'm just so attracted to her or to him or whatever. And it's like, if that's the ethic, we're fucked. Like where does that go? Like we're all alone, you know what I mean? It's like it goes to like single parenthood and fragmented cult. Like it's just not, that's not good. Like if you it's like if you think it is, then the mental exercise of like what happens if you do this for years, or if everybody did this, is
mm,
like, okay, what territory are we in again, right? But again, it's like I know that for me, when I was in my kind of like playboy pickup artist phase, nobody could fucking tell me like justify a reason to get out of it. It was almost like I had to do it. I had to do it. And doing it meant being immature, wielding a power that I had not yet integrated or knew what to do with. And I don't know. It's like maybe there could have been some sort of like teacher or community that or like reflection or support that could have expedited that learning process for me of kind of arriving to the place of like, okay, given who I am and like what moves me, what do I actually care about, that I kind of had to. The word had is interesting because I'm questioning my use of the language here, but it's almost like given that I felt so intensely socially ostracized and unwanted for much of my childhood, and there was so much like longing and lust and frustration and sexual frustration and confusion and even resentment, that when I had the power to seduce women, let's just call it that, that I just kind of like needed to belligerently do that a lot until I just kind of was like, okay, I got that out of my system. Like, now what do I care about? But it was almost like I had to pendulate to the other side. And I know
mm,
that during that time, it was very cavalier and foolish in a way, but it was also like, yeah, I had these powers now, like I had these abilities that I never had and fantasized about for so long, and then I just kind of had to go ham and then see what that was like and realize that that wasn't what I actually was looking for, or that it really mattered to me to wield those powers, let's call them, or those abilities, in a way that was actually more aligned with a bigger picture consideration. But it was like I couldn't have gotten there because somebody told me that
mm,
that's where I should end up or would end up. It was like I had to do it. But then, in so many other areas, I think people are able to benefit from the experience of other people, to be like, hey, bro, I've been there. You don't need that. Like, just go to the finish line. Like, here's the green card or whatever. Like, just go. Of just like, I've seen that so many times I'm in this marketing community, and there are a lot of people in there on the up and up where they just like get money. And it's like, oh, I want to buy a bunch of cars. And like one of the mentors will be like, well, I did that. And I realized that I didn't care at all about cars. I just wanted to be able to flex to my friends.
mm,
And it was really just a waste of time and money and energy. Uh, and it didn't really matter to me at all. What mattered to me is that I wanted to be loved by my community, and I wanted to have choice and freedom and expression. It's like, cool. Well, now that you know that, just skip that whole process where you buy cars. Like, just
Right.
just don't do that, you know? And it's like, I wonder if I sometimes I wonder, like, is there a way that I can impart the like lived experience on young bucks who think they need to go pimp it around the world for a couple years before they can relax? Um, and I don't know. Cause like there's a part of me that's like, maybe I still need to go pimp it around the world for a couple years before I can relax or something. So it's like that still is there. So yeah, I wonder about this. And I also wonder about how, for me, the times where I felt like I was able to receive uh, wisdom from people's lived experiences is when it was validating instead of uh,
Mm.
like judgmental. Because so many people are like, you shouldn't do this. And I'm like, you have no idea how important this is. And you don't even know what I'm talking about in the first place. You know, but people being like, wow, like, I see what you're doing, dude. And like, that's awesome. And like, of course, you're going to rub shoulders with people, but like, rock and roll, man, do your thing. That was kind of like, cool. Who are you? You know,
Yeah.
and
Tell
people
me
being
more.
like, there, son, you need to grow up. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, bro, I'm actually leaving now. Like that, you know, it's like,
That has me think there's like a default morality, especially around sex, which is kind of what sexual liberation, I think, generally was cracking out of. Is this a shame based, like, before you even try promiscuity, don't do it because it's makes you very bad. And
huh,
I know you're wanting it a lot right now, teenager, and that makes
uh-huh.
you really bad. So just don't even talk about it. There's like a default morality that is like the exoteric, what works for the most amount of people at the lowest level of consciousness.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes,
It's
dude,
shame. Shame works on low consciousness,
fear,
large
sure,
aggregates.
fear.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
totally.
there's like a higher calling of morality, which is like I'm choosing the sex magic of monogamous, like, relations,
Hmm.
not because I'm like ashamed of sex or sex is bad, but
Yeah, totally.
and I know I could be successfully promiscuous. Like, it, like,
Or
if you have the
polyamorous or whatever it is. Yeah.
right, like, if you know that you could, there, it's like,
It's like I could kill a guy, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but it's like it doesn't actually mean a lot to say I'm not going to be promiscuous if you do not have the tools or confidence or
100%.
like stuff to actually be
Dude, this is,
promiscuous.
I mean, we're getting into some territory here for sure. Because this is such a big thing when it comes to violence, for example. That's
Mm,
one big thing, like the willingness to be an asshole and the like, no more Mr. Nice Guy thing. Like, this
yeah.
has been a journey for me and just like untangling codependency of like, do I have the capacity to offend the people that love me, essentially? Like, like, is it in me to be like, actually, no?
Ugh.
Like, you know, like that, like that's a big one, right? Because if you don't have the power to do that, are you a nice person or are you just a
Right?
weak bitch?
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's like,
We tend to go toward our aptitudes, I mean, that is like a tendency, is like, oh, this thing is a little bit easier, so this is the thing I'm going to be excelling at, like, and that it applies to spiritual work as well.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I bring this up a lot where it's like, if you're when you think of, like, if you're dividing, say, personality types, or like this person tends to be more of an extrovert versus an introvert, then
hmm,
they're going to choose the things that are in that category of extrovert, like when they're engaging in the relational
Mm,
arts. And so it's going to seem as though they're like more advanced, or like more like, wow, they're like really studying, they're like practicing hard, or like but it's really just that the aptitude was already there.
right. So
It's
then if you're chaste, but it's like because you can't get any, then you're not
yeah,
actually
exactly.
chaste. Yeah,
Totally.
right.
right. You're
It's
just,
like,
yeah.
uh, rich territory. Rich territory. Yeah, I mean, the the immediate kind of example, which is, I think, nothing new, that, but just like when it comes to seduction, the sense of like men who don't have the capacity or the awareness that they have the ability to create sexual connections with women at scale is, it's easy from that perspective to be like, oh, it like, I don't want that life, or like that's bad, or like dudes that are like that are bad or whatever. But it's like, yeah, it's just not so easy. And I think the same thing could be said about violence, right? Where, this Bible verse that I was told, actually, this is trippy. I don't know if this is true. Somebody told me this. Um, there's a Bible verse that says something like, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth."
The
Yeah, the
Beatitudes.
Beatitudes. Yeah.
Yeah. So my understanding is that the actual Aramaic, I think it was Aramaic, maybe Hebrew, said something more along the lines of, "Blessed are those who are like a sheathed sword, for they shall inherit the earth." So those who have the capacity to do violence but choose not to are the ones who are going to go inherit the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Which is weird because blessed are the meek is a very different thing to tell the population than
Yeah.
blessed are those who are like a sheathed sword, that have the capacity for damage and violence but just don't use it.
Yeah.
That's a very, very different thing to plug into the minds of billions of people than blessed are the meek. So, like,
And
yeah.
it's so much more similar to the actual story of Christ, which is like, that was
Yes.
God who let himself be crucified. That's way different from like a poor, humble guy who was a rabbi who got crucified and couldn't have stopped it.
Hmm.
That's actually like a tragedy, but it's actually not that miraculous or
Yes.
see that
Yeah.
a rabble rouser got crucified. But it's
It happened all the time. Like
right.
constantly there was tyranny and oppression and violence of some sort of third party, like that, just, or some sort of governing body. Like that was just most of what happened. Like
Right.
that was what happened, like most of human history all the time, is that somebody didn't like some guy and then they tortured him to death in public to prove a point. It's like that's just what happened.
Yeah, okay, so like this is having me think that like almost if we're gonna have sexual liberation, we have to have sexual initiation where like young men and women are empowered. They're like given the sword and then they're maybe even like a year of like, if there's grass in the field to go play or something.
Yeah.
Like an expression of that and then and that is the power you have, so now sheath the sword and
Uh-huh.
yeah, some it feels like there's sort of there is for a very high level of morality, of sexual morality, we're going to need people who are highly competent in it and feel confident there, because now with like the pill and just like birth control in general, it's
Yep.
like you can't I don't know, the natural pressure used to be that women didn't really want to just have anybody's baby, that like you I it and
There's so much to that too, like the original thing of like being a virgin, that like men are looking for virgins, and like this is coming back around, like certainly in the like red pill black pill space, in the like manosphere, this is more or less the norm, that like low body count is better, and like a virgin girl, if you could find her, is the prize. Like that's what we want again after this movement of being like, you go girl, is like, no, I actually want a girl who's never been in the ruckus of all that crazy, actually, which is way more traditional and along the lines of what has been the norm for most of, uh, I don't know, civilization or whatever we want to call it. And the thing that's it's tricky is that I think we're in many ways almost like extracting the oppression and violence part of that to get back to the value of the morality of it, to be
Mhm.
like, being a virgin girl isn't valuable so that your dad can sell you and then you can belong to some other person. Like that's not it anymore. So let's see if we can kind of take that whole extreme expression of oppression and violence out of it and then get back to the actual ethic that may really resonate with people, including women. especially women in many cases where, that the validation of traditional values is trending. Like the like trad wife movement is a thing, right? Like that's, yeah. And there's so much shame around that and so much rebellion around that, but I think there's also a lot of peace and relaxation and like a orientation to like what do we actually want. And then on the other side, I think a lot of men gravitate towards that because of avoidance and projection and unmet stuff in them too, that it's like there's a lot of insecurity and a desire for ownership. And there, it's, I don't mean to like glamorize men who want virgin wives or whatever, because I think that that's also complex, but there
Virgin
is
wives
some,
and as many as I can get my hands on.
for sure, totally. And it's like, of course that does resonate, but back to what you were saying of like, does it resonate because it's easy? Of like, oh, if I got fucking 5 virgins, that would just be super easy for me to deal with. I just have like a whole harem and they've never been with any other man ever. It's just like, okay, easy hand to deal with, dude. Go for it. But it's like, that's, like, I think that the, yeah, it's good for people to maybe be a little suspicious or at least curious about the fantasy that we can indulge in that just seems so convenient. So convenient. But I mean, these are very complex issues, and I think that they're really important and will continue to be important. And there is, I think, a lot of pressure inside of us to look at them. I think that a lot of people are trying to reconcile what we're talking about in their own lives of like, what is my relationship to violence and what is my relationship to sex and chastity and exclusivity and containment and money
Yeah.
and a desire to be validated and like all like where does all of this fit into a different ethic or a different morality? I think is a very important and in many cases nuanced and confronting thing for people to really look at. That I think for me, a lot of my fantasies about like the kind of woman that I wanted or want is like not what meets the eye. That it's that those fantasies are just like convenient strategies for avoidance.
Mm.
And I think the same thing is true in sex, honestly. Like I think that a lot of our you know fantasies or ideas about what we want in sex are just convenient things that move us away from where there is real expansion and real depth. That's a whole, that's a wormhole that we can get into too when it comes to sex specifically, because I've seen many men have like a huge aha moment when they realize how much of their sexual lives are being lived from their heads, that their sexual life is not an embodied emergent experience, but it's like a top down thought based or fantasy based thing that they're enacting or seeking to get somebody to cooperate with enacting.
So then with that, like then how does one explore that landscape? Like how could you like the idea that attraction is a reality, like sexual attraction,
Mm.
even in a a morally held monogamous connection, like sexual attraction is a reality. And so then how can that be explored? I'm asking for a friend.
So I think that I don't want to be too overly simplistic and say that there's no place for like mind activity in sex, because that is not true either. But I think the way that most of us understand how to use the mind or the mental body or these different aspects of the self in sex is we're just very confused. And in many cases, I think it's better to just leave that alone for a long time. And it can be reintegrated when you have a deeper practice. But I think exploring sex from body based emergence is usually a better way to get a foundation than trying to have sex with anything to do with with mind, let's say on a practical, applicable level, that I think that most people would benefit from spending months, if not years, having agendaless, emergent sexual experiences and getting to know their body intelligence and their intuition and their orgasm and the relational kind of intersubjective emergent aspects of sexual experience from just being present and seeing what happens.
Mm.
What I have encountered from doing that a lot is stuff that I never, ever, ever would have thought to do. So having an opportunity to actually be like, who am I? Like, what am I? Because I think that most people, they don't know. Like every time that they engage their sexuality, they're engaging, and let's call in the work, I call it an operating system. They're engaging their sexual operating system that they inherited from a bunch of shit that had nothing to do with how to have a good life and how to be in alignment with ourselves and with nature and with love. It's just an accumulation of religious influence and family of origin and the role models we had when we were a kid and our traumas and epigenetics and pornography and media, that we like got this sexual operating system. So when we engage that, we're doing something that doesn't have anything to do with our sexual essence and doesn't have anything to do with how to have a good life. So the way to not do that, one of them anyways, is to explore presence and learn about the nervous system and how to regulate and co-regulate, and being very kind of loose here because there's a lot more to it. But like in short, just the practice of like learning how to really like be in your body, and to so many of the stuff that people explore in circling or authentic relating kind of practices, just seeing like what is actually occurring when you have an experience, like what actually happens when there is sexual energy and attraction and you come into connection with another person in presence. Like what actually happens? Like, is it a natural unfolding to have your penis inside of somebody's vagina, or is that just like an idea? How do we know unless we try? Like I think that it's fascinating to let go of all that shit we think we know about sex and just give ourselves the space to see what it's like to be in a body and to be with somebody else, and to see what the aliveness and the love flow between two people yields. Like, what does that produce? What does it generate? That I think it would I am a big proponent of people giving themselves the opportunity to see what that is. I think it's absolutely worthwhile to give yourself the opportunity to experience your sexuality as something that just comes from you, rather than this thing that we learned and that we're just executing. Like modern sex exe, and we just like do it. It's like we've run that file. Is like, it doesn't work. It doesn't. It's not a good program. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And this is, I think, also true with what most people have learned from the conscious sexuality movement too, is that it's just bolting on more things to that broken sexual operating system instead of getting back to body intelligence and intuitive mind and our capacity to be so much more expanded in our sense of ourselves, rather than this kind of like thing where it's like, oh, like now I just know how to like do the microcosmic orbit and like not bust and make her squirt, but like I'm still just doing the same thing. Is like, back to the same premise of like, is it constructive to give dysfunction more power and tools? It's like, probably not, or maybe not. At least maybe not.
At least maybe.
At least maybe not.
I love that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think to build on that, I want to maybe close out with some of your thoughts, kind of coming back
To
to
close out, we already out of time.
We're
It's gonna
getting
be
there.
like this is gonna be a 10 session series by the time we're done with it, y'all.
We're gonna have a whole year of like the Rob files.
the
like,
saga,
The saga.
Nice.
the Robacy. The yeah, like what is a way in a really honest and still committed to like the yeah, the shared morality of like a monogamous connection, how do you explore attraction that naturally comes up? Or what are ways
with other people.
with other people outside of that
Mm,
connection that are like uh
mm,
that are a limitless working, like you were talking about at
mhm.
the beginning of this session?
Hell
Uh
yeah.
yeah.
So rich. This is a big one. I don't know if we have time. You guys we have 13 minutes. Let's see what we can do
Yeah.
here. So yeah, there's a couple layers to this, right? So I think it's really important to speak to a couple of the big ones here because this is such a big topic for people, right? It's such a big topic. Um so one of the maybe least popular and important things that we can just put down, and maybe we'll unpack it a bit, but just to name it, I think that one reason why people's sexual energy is kind of going all over the place is because we are not in integrity with our creativity. So I think when our creative energy is being channeled into what is really meant for us, the tendency to want to sow our wild oats is way less, way less. That I think, like, when we are experiencing profound intimacy and harmony and integrity in our relationships, in a sense that our creative energy is being channeled into what it's meant to be, that the tendency to feel like I need to just like go pursue everybody I'm attracted to is very different. So I think this contextual layer of influence is huge and so often overlooked. And just to say, I named two different things. One is like, what is the status of the relationship, and is it working for me, and is it meeting my energetic, sexual, emotional, relational needs? And also in my life, is my creative energy uh being channeled into what it's really meant to, from a sense of purpose and alignment with who I am and why I'm here. So these two factors are huge, because I think if those two pieces are not there, then we're in a tilted plane when we try to look at, like, what do we do with attraction? We're not even really looking at the foundational elements of what that is and why things are the way that they are. So that's just one thing, and we can unpack that more. There's a lot to that in and of itself. Um, there's something that adjacent to this I could name about, like, we could think about it through the chakra system, basically, where it's like if your life force does not have the capacity to ascend in its expression of consciousness, then you'll just feel like you have to do something with your penis all the time, rather than this energy, like this life force and this vitality, can be expressed through all of these different parts of myself. That on a functional level, we could look at like nadis and sexual energy channels and chakras being imbalanced and open and all that sort of stuff as like, okay, there's this power, this Shakti from my root that comes up, and then it has to go into my balls and penis because that's the only place that it can move through, or something more related to survival, and that's just where, violence and stuff comes up, and there's reasons why people get stuck in those lower centers. Or does this energy have the capacity to transmute and sublimate and be channeled up into higher expressions? So this is another thing, is just like, is the system there? So those are just like foundational contextual pieces, just to name. Another thing that we can look at is how we are contextualizing experience. Like, what is unarguably occurring, where it's like, I could arrive at the conclusion of like, oh, I want to have sex with that girl, but it's like, do I, or was there just like some sensation in my body? Like it's like, where do we go? And I think a lot of that has to do with habits, of course, like the way that we are habituated within consciousness. And it very much relates to the last few things that I just mentioned. But I think this is huge, 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 huge. Um, yeah. So I think it can be very helpful to just own that there is attraction when there is. I think that this is a foundational piece that relates to our initial thing about resistance, about like, if there really is strong attraction, I think the first thing to do, or one of them, is to just own it. That's like, oh, there's strong energy here and it has my attention, or it's impacting my experience. That can be a useful thing for couples to just face what is, to just say what is so, and the more precise we can be with communication and ownership, the easier that can be. But yeah, do you want to ask more questions? Because I feel like after I've just named these foundational pieces, it's like, okay, now we can go so many directions with your question.
Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. I was like thinking you would do that.
Because I said yeah.
I guess.
Well, you also asked the initial question, so I'm curious if, like, now that I've like laid down some groundwork here, where do you want to take the question, if you do?
I asked the question, but it is more not really it's not actually like, wasn't really my question. It was more for on Jonathan's behalf that I asked the question.
Yeah. I get, okay.
Which is why I don't know what the follow-up, like, I want to know what
that
what you shared what impact that has had, and like what your question would be.
You saying that I have like feel immediately more ownership to like make the move.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, and then we also have 9 minutes, so it's like something that comes up for me is like after the step of owning, I feel like I have missing in my toolkit some deep process of like if I'm feeling strong attraction, especially if the other person is feeling strong attraction, it seems like there is something that is lighting that up. There's like something we could go down and explore that isn't like there is like you can interface sexually, which is like outside of the bounds of like my own sex magic practice, I guess you would say, which is a way to say monogamy. There's so then what do you do, I guess I want like some kind of practical framework for like, okay, how can two people actually trace the wire down the surface into the like, oh, this is what's going on, and then also recognizing that like probably have wounding in my sexual like layer that is like catching, it gets caught a lot in the sex layer.
Yeah.
But like, okay, but then how do I use the sex ding as like that's a signal of something like work I can do? What is that work? What could it look like?
Awesome questions. So one thing that I think is important is to reference this back to the first thing, just to name it, and then we'll go to something else. So one cool example is like, if you see a really beautiful woman, that the ability to just kind of move those beautiful feelings through the body is one reason why guys can end up not feeling like they need to fuck that girl, like just the feeling of like, wow, this is my feminine. Like, her feminine is evoking aliveness and eros in me, but that's mine. It doesn't have anything to do with her. Like, this is just life force. This is aliveness. This is a beautiful feeling and a beautiful energetic quality in myself, and I can enjoy that, and it can be complete. Like, that is complete. Like, I don't need to take that energy and like move it with that person for it to be complete. And that is huge. And I think that there's a lot of factors to that relate to us seeking external validation. I think this is another reason why this happens a lot in men, is that there's something that they don't have that's really affirming the goodness and innocence and power and beauty of who they are. So that energy is seeking to participate in that need getting met. And there's two sides to that, right? That I think that, like, yeah, ideally we all want to like self-source our worthiness and belonging and all that. But it's also really important to receive those imprints relationally for most people. So I think the adoration and the validation and the sexual gratification that we experience in a contained relationship or just in general can be a part of the healing process. But I think seeking that out constantly is also like a hungry ghost thing too. So it's tricky. It's often like when we don't need that from somebody else, somebody just shows up and gives it to us finally.
Yeah, that is so true.
It's so true. Yeah, I think it especially is true with sex and with men's kind of like pussy craziness, that it's like once they're like, okay, it's fine. I don't need that to like feel solid in my manhood, that a woman will come and like worship his penis and his heart. And then it's like, okay, cool. There we go. um yeah, so these are things that I think are relevant to a lot of people, and to the question of like, what do I do if I'm in community or whatever and there is clearly mutual attraction, or I just feel there's something happening. And I would say like, yeah, the erotic or like erotic sexual energy, eros, is intelligent. Like it is, there's something going on. But I think the piece that's really important is to be curious about what that is, because it's so often not like we need to have sex or like make babies or like you're my future partner or whatever. Like it's so often not that the humming is often shadow, from what I've seen, that there's something that's being evoked. And yeah, I think there's so many different strategies or approaches of what we might benefit from exploring. Like I think that it takes, in my own practice, I find that doing the work and exploration in myself and with the support of another person is that's not my partner or the person that I'm attracted to, is often the safest and most constructive stuff, because it's like I don't know that I need to get anybody else involved in this, and if I do, it might be pretty messy and hasty, so I would rather not. And I've done that a lot in the past, a lot of like, oh, I need to explore this, or like I want to get my partner involved in this or the community involved in this. And yeah, I just, I'm not so compelled that way, because I've seen that there's as much, if not more, transformational value and learning potential by just taking that into myself and getting curious about it. That this is about me, this is mine. It's not about her, and it's not about my partner, and it's not anything beyond that. And there are limits to that thing, and I think that can be its own sort of avoidance and codependency too.
Yeah.
Whoa. The discernment of spirits.
The discernment.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it. That's it. Totally. Because it's like, yeah, I liked what you said about the yeah, like suspiciously easy or whatever is the language that I conjure when I remember what you had said before.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like at least in my experience is like a a previously very promiscuous woman, um like the easy thing is to just like go right into fucking,
Mm-hmm.
versus like the edgy, like um yeah, like dealing with the shadow of it, or even like bringing it up
Yes.
with that person,
Yes.
and like leaning it
Beautiful. Yeah.
without the expectation of it going somewhere. I mean, that's that is the hard one. That isn't the easy one.
Yeah.
That
The
is
easy one is like
so
so
big.
much bigger and
Right.
more,
This
well, chaotic.
What you bring up is so critical. I had a profound insight that I shared with a program I was running at the time, and it just sent ripples, really landed, was around how much our impulse towards intercourse is actually, I think, a coping mechanism related to how vulnerable it is to just be present with somebody. That
Yes.
it's like, oh, if I just put my dick in you, I'll feel relieved that this is so vulnerable. Where it's like, wow, I'm bare and I'm here to like be judged and to be seen and to, be betrayed or abandoned or whatever it might be. But like I'm vulnerable and I'm here is just like, whoa, that can be a lot of sensation to presence. But like,
Yeah.
oh, if I just like if I get my penis inside of you, I can just like, oh, okay, I'm fine. Like, I'm
Right.
lovable. I don't need to worry about that. Sheila just let me inside of her, so it's fine now. You know, that I've noticed this like literally in the coziness of my beautiful committed partnership, where we were laying in bed making out and like rolling around, and I could feel this escalation towards intercourse, and I was like, what is that? Like, what is this? Like, oh, I want to just go there really quick. And it's like, what is that? And I was like, oh, I previously just thought that was horniness. But I was like, whoa, that's not what that is. And I just was like, oh, whoa. And it opened up into this like real fear of like, I feel afraid of just being here. So I'm going to like get out of the scary by entering into this place that's less vulnerable in a certain way. You know, of course, there's all kinds of additional vulnerabilities you have to deal with once you're there, but at least I'm not in that one anymore, right?
Yeah.
The container is now closed. Big, deep bow to Rob Kancler, who gave us hours and hours of an intimate look into sexual mysticism through the eyes of a true master. Because this stuff is so sacred and central to the human experience, it also ends up touching on so much of what it means to be a human in the first place, what it means to figure out how we thrive in the incarnate realm. If you're a male and you're looking for more of this kind of insight, join one of Rob's groups. Just go to IHateNotHavingGreatSexAllTheTime.com. And with that, we have a nice way of closing. Keep it namaste.